If you've been watching my videos for a while, you might remember an older project that I was working on before beginning work on my current game, Couch Combat. Or if you watched that video I released like literally a few weeks ago, then you're probably also caught up. Nevertheless, I'm sure this summer you were interested in seeing what exactly happened to that project. So in this video I'm just going to take a more in-depth look at how that game failed, what led to its failure, and also just look at some of the plans that never came to fruition. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'm just going to basically pick up where the last devlog for this Project Astro, as they called it, left off 9 months ago. I had just finished up making the boss for the first area. I actually mentioned in the devlog that I was beginning to get tired of working on the game at that time and had actually begun working on Couch Combat before even releasing that last devlog. Beyond that devlog, I did work on the game a tiny bit, but that work was mostly on small bugs and just fixing up issues with the levels, so there really isn't any more progress to cover. Looking back, the game was beginning to get pretty cluttered. The plan for the game was always for it to be a big Metroidvania, but I had hardly even played many Metroidvanias at the time, so I just more liked the idea of creating a big world inside of the spaceship that you explored with upgrades to your characters and clever little roadblocks rather than actually making a Metroidvania. By the end of the 9th devlog, I was getting fairly close to having a simple version of the first area completed. Well, the first area was the loading docks, and it was the first part of the game and sort of a tutorial area. To be fair, there wasn't any real written tutorial, so it probably wouldn't have done a very good job of being a tutorial level. But the game is fairly straightforward to play, so I guess that wouldn't have been a huge deal. But now I'm going to go through a few smaller issues with the game that led me to quitting development and moving on to Couch Combat. Then I'll cover the main topic that this video is about, scope creep. The first issue was simply that I was beginning to get bored of the project. As I mentioned a bit earlier, I was getting bored of working on the game, and I had been for at least a month by the 9th devlog. Making the game was fairly repetitive because of the planned huge scope of the game. I didn't have time to make smaller things that were more fun to make, like more weapons, an intro cutscene, or really flesh out things like rooms. All that fun stuff was planned for the far future, so I never really got to doing that. I was mostly just making rooms and doing things like room transitions, mini-maps, and stuff like that. Looking back, I wish I had planned for the game to be a simple action platformer or something like that, because that was something I could have actually finished within a year or so, and it would have probably been much higher quality than any Metroidvania I was able to scrape together over a much longer period of time. Another large reason that I ended up dropping the project was a lack of a clear and achievable goal. I had a decent idea of what I wanted the eventual game to look like, but I had basically no idea how to reach those lofty goals. I wanted the game to be a Metroidvania with a smooth movement system and fast-paced combat, and I was sort of able to achieve the later goals. But the big issue was the fact that I was trying to make a Metroidvania for my first major project. It really doesn't matter who you are, if your first project is a Metroidvania, it probably won't turn out great. But the main issue I had? Scope creep. I didn't have a precise goal in mind for the game, and that sometimes can be okay, especially for more experienced developers. It can allow them to iterate and find out what works and what's fun and what isn't. And for me, on the other hand, I wasn't even sure what a Metroidvania needed, so I felt like I was just endlessly working through more systems like healings, maps, rooms, respawning that I just did not enjoy working on. And if I'd continued work on the game, it is likely that that pile would only grow, as I still needed a proper save system, travel systems, and way more. And while I'm not entirely sure if this qualifies as scope creep, I think it was very closely related. I was not able to get a very good picture in my head of what I wanted the game to be. I had grand ambitions, but they were somewhat blurry, and I didn't know how I would ever reach them. Not having a somewhat precise goal in mind really enabled scope creep, because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted for in the game, so I just kept adding to my plans to try and reach that blurry vision I had for it. But anyways, I'm now just going to show off some of the plans that never came to fruition. There isn't any real reason to show them off, but I kind of want something to do with them, and this is as good an end for the game as any. I wanted the game to be split up into 6 major areas. The first area was a fairly small and linear area called Loading Dock Alpha. It was the only somewhat finished area, and it has robot enemies, lots of boxes, and this background. I was supposed to have a lot more detail, but as mentioned, it wasn't anywhere near finished. The second area was sort of a sewer area. The plan was for this area to be a sort of connector between all the areas. It would have monster enemies like the flying one I already have in the game, and water mechanics. After the second area, it was planned for you to be able to access all other areas other than the final area. So a few of these area ideas were like a lab inspired by Portal, a factory land with lava and saws and stuff, but neither of these ever came to fruition. So while I did actually have plans to make the game more open like a Metroidvania, I just really never got that far. Around the time that I was working on the boss for the Project Astro, I had another idea for a game. I was looking around for a decent split-screen FPS for the time, and there were no modern ones to be found at all, much less found on Steam. So I decided that my next project would be a split-screen FPS specifically made to be accessible with simple graphics and customizable for the PC audience. This new project was obviously couch combat, and I made sure to learn from the many mistakes I had made during the brief development of Project Astro. First off, I made sure I had a simple, obtainable base for the game, and so I laid out a very simple gameplay loop similar to games like Stick Fight the Game and Game Beast. These games had a simple formula that worked very well with split-screen multiplayer, so I focused on creating a simple gameplay loop above all else for the next few months of the game's development. After that, I reached a point where I could release a version of the game that was playable. So after much less time, I already had a lot more to show for Couch Combat than I ever did for Project Astro. I'm currently on the second phase of development for Couch Combat. I'm finishing up all the main mechanics in the game, making an art style, and beginning to implement quality of life things and customization options. After this phase, all that really will be left is to add lots more content to the game, polish it up, and eventually release it. Other than just having a clearer plan of where I wanted to take the game, I was also sure to make sure that I had an actual market for the game. That's why I focused on the split-screen multiplayer market on PC. Other than Nintendo, most big developers have already completely abandoned the local multiplayer market. So we've been seeing smaller indie studios come in and make games like the Jackbox games and others that I mentioned, but none of them have really made a split-screen FPS, which in my opinion is one of the best sorts of local multiplayer games. So I decided to focus on just getting that audience. Finally, I decided to design my game to combat two major hurdles I faced in the past. These were scope creep and the constant urge to move on to other projects. Scope creep was mostly just handled by having a concrete and simple plan for the game, and I designed the game so that after I finished up the second or even the first phase of development, I could quit and still have a functioning game to show for it. Anyways, I decided to finally end the Project Astro Devlog series now. I'm releasing an unfinished version of the game. It is fully playable, but you also have a ton of health to help offset the bugginess of the game. If you hit spikes, you get sent way back, so don't hit the spikes. Finally, the laser beam weapon doesn't work and the shotgun is overpowered. If you want to download the game, it is only available on Windows unfortunately, but you can grab it on itch.io for free. Thanks for watching and be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.